chat and tell Leslie, I was about to say, Leslie's going to be recording, and we will stop recording to have a discussion at the end. But in the meantime, please add in the chat where you're calling from, your agency, your location, and your traditional territory, if you like. And so I'll introduce myself and our speakers today. So I'm Lynn Campbell. I work in the BC Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. Well, at least for now. I'm probably changing ministries, it sounds like. And I'm phoning today from Victoria, the home of Lekwungen speaking peoples, the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich people. So blessed to be living here. And I want to welcome Roy. Thank you so much for joining from Municipal Natural Assets Initiative. And I'll let you introduce yourself in more detail, as well as Matt from District of West Vancouver. Thank you so much for coming today. I also want to say hi to Lindsay. Lindsay is the CDFCP coordinator, Coastal Douglas-Fir Conservation Partnership Coordinator, and has been putting together this amazing webinar series. And also on the call today are other members of the CDFCP's steering committee who've also contributed lots of time, thank you, and members of the CDFCP, as well as a group I coordinate, the Species and Ecosystems at Risk Local Government Working Group, and others. Please, we thank you for joining us today. So just in terms of background, if you're not too familiar with the CDFCP, I'm very visual, so the map down in the corner sort of shows you the area of which where the CDFCP is in, Southwest BC. And the mission of what we're trying to do together is to sort of promote conservation and stewardship of the CDF, the Coastal Douglas-Fir, and their associated ecosystems in Southwest BC. And this is through sound science, sharing information, supportive policies, and community education. So anything else I need to mention right now? Okay, so this is the only other thing I was going to say. So I think we've already shared this with you, and we have both Roy Brooke and Matthew MacKinnon joining us today. And I'll remind you, at the end of the call, we do have one more. We had 6 webinars in the series, and there's one more coming after this. But I'm going to stop sharing, and we'll pass over to Roy.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Roy Brooke. I'm the Executive Director of the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative. Very pleased to be here. Let me just figure out how to share my screen. And while I am doing that, I will say that I am also calling in from Victoria, the home of the Lekwungen people. There we go. Is that showing up properly? Okay, good. So yeah, again, thanks for the opportunity. My hope in the next 15 or 20 minutes or so is to do a couple of things. First, give a really very brief introduction to ecosystem services, nature-based solutions. I'm sure that most of you will be very familiar with this, but thought I would just give that little bit of background. Probably an equally brief snapshot of the kinds of tools and methodologies that are available to think about ecosystem services and nature-based solutions, and then to do a deep dive into the one that I'm principally involved with, which has become known as municipal natural assets. And through that presentation, I'll tell you a bit more about MNAI and what it's done, where it's come from. So first of all, what are ecosystem services? Basically, it's a way to think about all of the benefits we get from nature, and they enable us to do absolutely just about everything we do, and they're typically divided into 4 categories: regulating services, provisioning services, supporting services, and cultural services. And the idea, as many of you may well know, really started gaining currency maybe 20 years ago through the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. Nature-based solutions, by contrast, are actions to preserve and protect ecosystem services. So we start getting more into the land of methodologies. And as you can see on the screen, this is a common definition from the World Conservation Union. the idea of nature-based solutions are usually fairly human-centric. Why are nature-based solutions important at all? Why are we having this discussion? It really depends on what prism you want to look at things through, but some of the numbers that are being kicked around these days from an economic point of view, just to look at it through that lens, are that most of, or around half of global GDP is related to or interdependent with or dependent on nature and its services. You can see some figures on your screen related to the value of nature services in Canada. And it doesn't really matter whether you're looking at BlackRock or World Economic Forum. The UK Treasury released the Dasgupta report last year. They all say much the same thing, which is that there isn't really a society or a community or an economy worth speaking about that is in some way existing independent of nature. What we do and are all rests on nature. At the same time, and again, probably no surprise to anyone on this call, nature, biodiversity, ecosystem services are all under threat. And some of the numbers that you can see at the bottom of the screen illustrate that. The municipal context is the one that I'll be speaking about principally. And the municipal areas, peri-urban areas, these are the ones where we feel nature the most in many cases, and we feel nature most directly, but it's also the area where nature is most at risk and is being depleted the quickest. And you can see down at the bottom there figure around taken from southwestern Ontario, but it's not so dramatically different elsewhere, around the percentage of wetlands, just to use one example, that are being lost to urbanization. And urban homes are becoming the dominant ones for the planet. So it's a very important nexus for us to think about. And then finally, before I leave this very sort of high level context, there's an interesting quote that I like last year from the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and the IPCC did a joint report. And they said it's only by considering climate and biodiversity as parts of the same complex system that we can develop solutions that avoid maladaptation. And if we ignore the inseparable nature of climate, biodiversity, and human quality of life, we will find ourselves with non-optimal solutions to either crisis. So it's not two different problems, it's one, and we solve them both or we solve neither. Lots of different ways to think about nature-based solutions. Sometimes it's conceptualized as green, as a component of green infrastructure. We can think about infrastructure-based solutions, nature-based solutions that are primarily infrastructure related, like stormwater management, temperature regulation, or non-infrastructure based ones. There's a multitude of frameworks out there to conceptualize and manage ecosystem services. Green Shores is a BC-based one. Low impact development, water balance model, municipal natural asset management is therefore not the only show in town. There's many ways to think about this, but it is the one I'm principally involved with. So I'll dig into this now a little bit and explain what we mean by municipal natural asset management and why it's relevant. So first, what are municipal natural assets? These are the stocks of resources or ecosystems that local governments either can or do rely on for the sustainable provision of one or more local government services. And that's a definition we cooked up and peer reviewed a few years ago at the start of MNAI's work. MNAI, by the way, I should say, is a not for profit, and with a cross-Canada focus. And the core idea of municipal natural asset management is that natural assets, so think here about wetlands, forests, green spaces, riparian areas, coastal areas, they're amongst our most valuable, and they're central to any resilient infrastructure system. Moreover, if we can understand them, account for them, and manage them as core infrastructure, then local governments can deliver vital services, so ones they would otherwise have to deliver via an engineered solutions, and realize a whole stream of very important co-benefits. So that there's an awful lot in that mouthful. So let's unpack that example a bit. Take a wetland. Its biological function may be to store water, to retain water. But the way that this translates into services for a local government may be in the form of drinking water filtration, or flood risk reduction, or stormwater management. In other words, services that the local government is on the hook to deliver anyway. But to the extent that local governments in this country are thinking about nature and natural assets at all, they're thinking about them primarily as green or social or recreational amenities. And those are all good things, but that narrow conceptualization leaves us with a few problems. First, it predisposes us to thinking about nature more as a beauty contest than anything else, in the same way that we tend to think about protecting, say, a snow leopard more than I don't know, an insect. There may be very important natural assets and ecosystems that maybe aren't beautiful to look at, but are providing us vital services, and we need a broader conceptualization. Second, and at a very sort of brass tacks level, it means that every hour of every day, week in, week out, local governments are taking planning, zoning, land use, investment, and other decisions without really understanding the full service, the full suite of services that they are getting from nature, the value of those services, or what it might cost them to replace those services were they to become degraded. And here's the thing, once nature services are gone, they're gone. Yeah, sure, we can do some restoration, but it's very hard to get things back as they were, if that's even possible at all. And third, it means that there's quite a large gap between the potential of natural assets and how most local governments in this country are thinking about that potential or acting on it. And so really nature ends up being overused and undervalued. And that picture in the bottom right-hand corner is a bit of a metaphor for this. It's a bioswale or a farmer's ditch. It's a photo I took in Stratford, Ontario. And these can provide very valuable stormwater services. In this case, it's filling up with junk. The picture on the left is one from Gibson's, BC, that I'll come back to in a second. And it shows something quite different, which is that if we are deliberate about this, we can manage, monitor, restore, protect, enhance, acquire nature to protect a wide range of services that it provides. And as I say, those are both core local government services, very practical sorts of things, plus a wide range of co-benefits, some of which may be quite intangible. Culture, some of which are very practical, but a little harder maybe to monetize in all cases, like health. So why do we care about all this? Well, it depends a little bit on who we are. But if we think about it from a local government point of view, these entities in Canada manage around 60% of our country's infrastructure with about 12 cents on the tax dollar. Much of their existing infrastructure is reaching the end of its useful life, meaning that costs are going up. And you can see a few of the facts and figures. I won't bother repeating them all, but you can see some of the facts and figures related to the state of infrastructure in Canada. At the same time, and none of us need to look very far at all, unfortunately, to see the latest example, climate change is hammering us all more and harder all the time. And basically it means what that tells us from a local government point of view is we can't just build our way out of this problem. We can't just build more and bigger than we did last year. And we just can't afford it, even if we did want to. It means that we have to work with nature, not against nature. It means that we need to understand when, where, and how we depend on it and act accordingly, to act as though nature matters. Now, still speaking quite narrowly about a local government, from a local government point of view, the good news in Canada is that local governments, whether they like it, whether they don't like it, they're required to adopt modern, structured asset management processes. And these have as their core operating idea, the idea of sustainable service delivery. So that this means if you're the director of engineering or finance or public works, you don't care, and you don't really need to care so much if your service is coming from a quote green asset or a gray asset. What you care about is whether or not that service is cost effective and reliable. And so to the extent that we can demonstrate that indeed nature does provide vital local government services, local governments kind of have to pay attention. The only reason folks really show up to work at a local government level is to provide services. And so if nature provides those services and does so reliably and effectively, it's something that must be taken seriously. The other thing that's interesting about asset management, we're finding more and more, it provides not quite a tailor-made platform for thinking about nature and natural assets, but a really solid one. A really solid one that, again, all local governments have to adopt. So we're not going to them and saying, look, we know you're busy, but here's an entirely new thing for you to worry about. We're going to them and we're saying, look, you have to do asset management anyway. You might as well do it properly and think about all of the assets that can provide you with services. And that means that you must understand, conceptualize nature as being important, begin to account for it, and so on. So to take a very, very quick tour through the methodology, which we've adapted fairly heavily, the kinds of things we're doing at a local government level. First, working with them to understand what are the natural assets that a local government owns? What are the ones that are in their jurisdiction, whether or not they own them? What are the ones that they rely on, which may or may not be the same as the ones that they own and or are in their jurisdiction? Everyone's downstream of somebody. Then we help them understand the condition of those natural assets and the risks that they face and the services that they might be linked to. Then we get into, typically after that, that's sort of the gateway. Then we get into quite a sophisticated and detailed modeling phase where we help them. We have an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary team that helps do this, understand the services that a given set of natural assets are providing. So if we have a series of wetlands or some green spaces, what are the stormwater management or aquifer recharge services that these are providing? What is the value of those services if the local government has to provide them by some other means? And I want to pause here and say, we are never valuing nature. We are only valuing and speaking about the services from nature. I don't think it's either possible or desirable to try and come up with a price tag, quote unquote, on nature. But what we are helping local governments to do, if you don't understand the monetary value of the services, then you're still putting a price on nature. It just happens to be zero. So what we're helping them do is understand the value of the services that nature provides to them as a local government and typically to the community at large. Together, those values, they provide a minimum value, but still very important information. Then we get into what we call a planning phase. And here we can work through really practical scenarios. What happens if I double my riparian buffers? What happens if I acquire this set of land? What happens if a forest fire takes out 2/3 of the watershed in 2040? What happens to my services? Can I cover the costs? Can I afford to build a water filtration plant and water treatment plant if I degrade my aquifer? All very operationally useful data and scenarios, and they address the fact, it makes this stuff really real for local governments, and it also helps address the fact that by and large, nature-based solutions still remain largely theoretical, largely disconnected small-scale pilots. And that's true globally, and the literature will back me up on this point. And we're really trying to help local governments get away from that problem, make this real. And by doing it on an asset management platform, it is an inherently scalable activity. Then we get into the implementation phase. I'm just doing a bit of a time check. Then we get into the implementation phase. I don't have a ton of time to go into detail, but suffice it to say that that includes strategic, policy, acquisition, a range of other measures that can be taken. And it's part of an adaptive management cycle. It's not just a situation where you say, good, I've managed my asset and it's done. The management, the restoration, the protection continues for as long as the assets are in existence, which is potentially in perpetuity. We started from one isolated example or initiative in Gibsons. By Christmas last year, we clocked just over 100 across Canada. Sounds impressive maybe at one level, but it's still a drop in the bucket when you consider there's almost 4,000 local governments. Gibsons on the Sunshine Coast was the first mover. Just to give a couple of very quick examples of the kinds of things that have happened. So Grand Forks in the interior of BC, just north of the border, they had massive river floods in 2017 and 2018. We did a bunch of work with them looking at the Kettle Valley floodplain under different development scenarios. Lo and behold, the floodplain floods. When the water rises, the floodplain has a value. Modeling out the different scenarios gave them a basis to secure around $54 million from the feds to restore the floodplain to its original state. It involves expropriation, managed retreat, obviously a very emotionally and politically challenging situation. But nevertheless, the conclusion is that restoring the floodplain is far better than just engineering our way out of the solution. Another case example, Riverview, New Brunswick, a large development was proposed in the Mill Creek area, 50 square kilometer area that drained out near the development. They wanted to really figure out what their natural assets were, what should be protected in this development. They were going to build a road sort of through a wetland. Through the work that we did with them, they realized that in basically a 1 in 100 year storm event, the wetlands had roughly $1.5 million of value in terms of just a very narrow slice of the services that they could provide in our current climate. That rose to almost double that in future climate change scenarios. So they've changed their development planning. They moved the road. It's no longer going through the wetland. They've actually, in fact, started linking up some of the wetland areas to neighboring parks. The development is still going ahead, but in a more thoughtful and intelligent way that really sort of takes account of nature and is sort of I guess you'd say, a counterpoint to the development that all of us can see in our neighborhoods, where someone will go in, scratch away every last green thing, and then say, okay, what services do we now need to build back? And every time we do that, someone's got to pay. Someone has to pay for all of those new services that nature was probably providing in the first place. So there's a very sound fiscal argument in all of this. So anyway, a couple of quick case examples, sort of coming to the end of this. As I say, we're a not-for-profit. Our mission is to make natural asset management a mainstream proposition across Canada. That's not going to happen because we rush around to each of 3,600 local governments. It happens if we create an economic subsector, one in which there's market demand, multiple players who can help meet that demand, and then an overarching set of norms, standards, and academic programming and professional development, so that natural asset management is done comparably, effectively, and replicably across Canada. As a couple of very quick examples of a professional standards, some of you will have already seen this. BC's engineering regulator came out with professional standards maybe 3 months ago that said, look, if you're doing asset management, you need to think about nature as part of this. And we issued a co-companion that has their logo on it also to explain how you do that. They're a regulator, so that stuff has the force of law now. It's just the first domino, but it is a very important one. Some of you may have also seen we're now working with the Canada Standards Association, or CSA group, to develop a standard for inventories, which, if you think back to that wheel I showed, is the first step in the process. And what that means is 1.5 years, 2 years from now, there'll be a national standard that is, by definition, kind of the entry point or the lowest acceptable standard, but it means that the market then opens up, and consulting firms, any consulting firm can go help any local government do this work, but according to a standard. So we get more people doing this faster. So those are just 2 quick examples of the kind of stuff that we are working on to create an enabling environment. What would I do if I were starting from zero and thinking about this? There's a few things that I would do, depending on if I'm a local government or a community group. Sometimes it's a conversation, and it's a couple of hours well spent. There was one community we worked with. They sat down before we started with them, and the local government just had a conversation. They said, well, what are the most important services we deliver? And they realized that it was emergency services and water purification, or water delivery. And they said, okay, well, that's great. Where does the water come from? Well, it comes from the aquifer. Good, so that's free. That's good news, right? Well, what do we know about the aquifer? And there was a long, awkward silence. No one knew anything about the aquifer. Well, how does planning and zoning and engineering, like, how do we take this into account in our decision making? Well, we don't, because we don't know anything about it. Well, how would we replace it if we degraded our aquifer? Well, we can't. There is no replacement. How would we even conceptualize this? Well, we'd have to build a filtration plant. Anyway, to make a long story short, they realized they had this incredibly valuable asset and was providing most of the community's most important services. Nobody knew anything about it. It was not being included in decision-making in any way, shape, or form. They had a whole bunch of undocumented risks and liabilities. There's no way they could have covered the costs for a filtration plant and treatment, and it would have taken a decade to bring that stuff about anyway. So sometimes it's a conversation, and it's thinking about one situation. The other thing, and it's really hard to go wrong with this, is an inventory. Again, that first slice there that I pointed out. We can do these, we can knock these out in sort of 6 to 8 weeks now. Quite often we've been having them heavily subsidized, so we're able to offer these to local governments for around $2,000 or $3,000. And I have yet to find a local government that can't afford that. In some cases, and even the full cost is like $16,000 to $18,000. And this, you can't do much until you understand, what are my natural assets? What's the condition they're in? What's the risks they face? It's a really good starting point. And to put it rhetorically, why would you not want to know these things? And it starts as the basis for natural asset management and as a basis for awareness. So I think I've actually gone over my time. I apologize for that, and I will stop now. Thank you for your time, and I'd very much be happy to answer questions later.
Yeah, no, I was going to try and tell you there is a little bit more time because unfortunately, yeah, one of our speakers had a conflict. But I think there's going to be a lot of questions. So folks, please jot them down. We will go over to Matthew in just a sec here. But if things have come up while you're listening to Roy, please write them down, and we'll have hopefully quite a bit of time to ask lots of questions. I have a lot of questions. There's a lot of information. So thank you so much. Big round of applause, virtual applause for you, Roy. Thank you. And okay, so Matthew, over to you.
Okay, well, thanks, Roy. That was a great introduction to natural assets and natural asset management. Good morning, everyone. My name is Matthew MacKinnon. I'm the District Environmental and Ecosystems Manager in the Parks Department, and I'm with the District of West Vancouver, and I'm a registered professional biologist. So today I'd like to walk you through a follow-up to our natural assets inventory. We completed our original inventory, as Roy was alluding to, one of the first steps in natural asset management. We completed that in 2019. We identified all of the district's natural assets and came up with a high-level calculation of the replacement value of those natural assets in terms of the services that they provide the District of West Vancouver community. And so I'll share with you some of the next steps in natural asset management following the inventory, what some of the challenges and climate events that have occurred that have sort of pushed us into the next steps for natural asset management. Hopefully today you can take away some lessons learned from the District of West Vancouver experience and apply them to your organization. So just a brief overview, I'll share briefly our natural asset inventory that was completed in 2019. We'll look at some of the policies and the inventories that have been completed since that time. And we'll also look at some of the challenges that we've faced in the last few years in relation to climate-related events and some of the pressures that our natural assets are seeing. And we'll look at some of our next steps. So no shortage of natural assets in West Vancouver. We have wetlands, forests, parks, lakes, rivers, and creeks, you name it, we've got it. We even have fields and soil underneath. So for those of you new to the topic, we had a great introduction from Roy. We look at these natural resources as the services and the services they provide the community. And so we need to manage those services and manage those assets so that we can maintain a sustainable level of community service for West Vancouver. So the general consensus is that we've sort of ignored ecosystem services up to this point. They've been undervalued or not valued at all. And so this may have led to, for example, some suboptimal decision-making when it comes to asset management and providing services to the community. Again, no shortage of natural assets here. This slide shows we've got 220 hectares of parkland, 135 kilometers of trails, 30 kilometers of beautiful coastline revered by our community. But we are seeing some challenges, climate-related challenges, sea level rise and storm surge event, atmospheric rivers. They really are impacting our natural assets here in West Vancouver. So looking now at the coastline, over time, we've sort of built out seawalls and other structures, engineered assets to provide these services to the community. In the photograph here, you see there's actually the Centennial Seawalk underneath that storm surge event there. That's a king tide with a storm surge. And it's not just a recreational asset there. There's a sanitary sewer main and a Metro Vancouver water main beneath that ocean there that you see. So we are seeing a changing coastline, and we really need to look at, the next generation of infrastructure has to be attuned to the realities of the 21st century. So the next couple of slides will demonstrate that we really need some out-of-the-box thinking when it comes to climate change adaptation. We had a storm January 7th. It was a king tide event combined with with heavy winds and storm surge, and we saw major catastrophic damage to our engineered infrastructure along our coastline. Here's some examples of some of our piers that are still closed to the public. And these engineered assets, they have major recreational values. The community expectation right now is that these piers are replaced as is. But looking forward, we really need to look at, is there a better way? The next storm surge and king tide event could very well destroy a brand new pier if we were to put one in there. A bit of context on this storm event: the January 7th storm was followed or sorry, the prior to this January 7th storm event, there was some major flooding in the Fraser Valley, as we all are aware, and the log accumulation from the Fraser River, those logs ended up out in the Burrard Inlet, and what that ended up doing is creating this sort of battering ram effect on the district coastline from Ambleside to Dunderave. So it's quite interesting to see that, you know, even a climate-related event in the Fraser Valley, it ends up having impacts on the district West Vancouver, for example. So this is climate change in real time. It's pretty sobering stuff. You know, our district waterfront buildings didn't go unscathed either. We've got some well-loved buildings along our waterfront, and really the only long-term solutions for these buildings is to raise them to the modern flood construction levels, or to retreat and move those buildings inland. So some considerable damage sustained to some of the foundations of these coastal buildings, a lot of nuisance flooding. We do mitigate the potential for flooding during king tide events with this Tiger Dam deployed around structures. But we are seeing, you know, again, real-time impacts of climate change on our natural assets. Our forest, upperlands forest, one of the most revered natural assets in our community, huge swaths of mature and old growth forests, as well as secondary forests, provides drinking water supply to our community. But we are, again, seeing some major issues in the upperlands and in our urban forests. We're seeing some major die-off of western red cedar and yellow cedar, presumably related to drought conditions throughout the summer months. We also are working towards managing competing uses. Lots of plans for development in this region, Cypress Village being the major proposed development in the area. And as well, we're seeing the drive, the community desire to address interface fuel and wildfire risk. So there's proposed plans for interface fuel management in these areas. And interestingly enough, for those that work in municipalities, you know, some of these, for example, the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, it can be in direct conflict with, say, the tree protection bylaw. So there's some challenges going forward for our community on those issues. Another example of degradation and impacts to our ecosystem, likely related to climate-driven events. We saw, or sorry, I'll just back to freshwater ecosystems. My apologies. You know, we have some very important ecosystems in freshwater ecosystems in the District of West Vancouver. As I mentioned previously, they provide drinking water supply to our community, flood reduction. But we do see, again, conflicts in use. Our most revered freshwater ecosystem, White Lake Park, literally during the pandemic was loved to death and saw major trail degradation, soil erosion, ecosystem degradation of that very important biological hotspot in the District of West Vancouver. Jumping now to the Capilano, the impacts of some of these atmospheric river events. We saw some major atmospheric rivers in early 2020. And that promulgated what we think was this Capilano landslide occurred in 2021. Major impacts on community recreational trail along the Capilano River. There's a sanitary line that was impacted here. And again, the expectation from the community is that this is repaired and replaced as is right away. And what we quickly realize is that it's not necessarily feasible to repair and replace this in its current location. And we really are looking at rerouting this through this potential trail and this sanitary line through neighborhoods. And so there's going to be some compromise associated with the protection of natural capital assets. One thing to note on the Capilano landslide that occurred in 2021, you know, the participating First Nations, rightly so, flagged issues related to sedimentation of the Capilano River and water quality issues if that sanitary main was potentially ruptured. So lots of competing issues and and nuances associated with these events. Just briefly look at our natural area parks. We, as I mentioned, during the pandemic, we saw unprecedented visitation in our district parks. It's sort of common knowledge that the demand and access to parks and green spaces increased during the pandemic. And, you know, they're an important source of resilience for the community and during the coronavirus epidemic. This visitation, though, it really brought some major challenges to parks managers in the district, mostly related to capacity, parking lots, user conflicts, a lot of garbage in our parks. And so we had to manage this. We had a variety of tools that we looked to manage the increase in demand. We had some operational solutions, for example, traffic control. We increased our garbage pickup and bringing in portables to address the sanitary concerns. We brought in extra park rangers and patrols in these areas. And then we also looked at communication solutions as well, including social media and education, asking people to pack out what they bring in, those types of things. So just a brief overview of the value of the natural assets in our community. You can see here, the natural asset inventory that we completed a couple of years ago really gave some sort of high value estimates of these various natural assets in the District of West Vancouver. And following this, I originally thought, well, we're going to refine these numbers, and we still very well may. But another aspect of this is, well, maybe it's time to just roll up our sleeves and get to work on some of the inventory work that's required and some of the policy development that's required. So I've put my focus there instead of refining the numbers on the natural capital assets, looking at what we need to do next. So I'll jump right in to some of the work that we've completed to date since the natural asset inventory was completed. I shared with you the importance of our upper lands and very diverse, biologically diverse ecosystem. And we are seeing some pressures, as I mentioned, with some future planned development in the area. So one of the first steps we took was increasing our knowledge of the ecology of the upper lands. We conducted the first comprehensive ecological inventory of the upper lands. And that really gave us a baseline indicator of the value of these ecosystems, what we have there, what sensitive plant and animal communities are present in the upper lands. And that will really help us and staff and council inform them on how do we guide future projects, future development projects and future recreational projects in the upper lands. So it did flag, for example, it flagged the importance of freshwater habitats in the upper lands and their rarity, and identified biodiversity hotspots. So really important information, really glad that we undertook this inventory prior to any Cypress Village development planning work. Another aspect of managing natural assets on the coastline, the District of West Vancouver undertook a 3-year working group of residents, completed a coastal marine management plan through a working group. And glad to say this management plan was recently approved by council. This is a high-level plan. It's intended to guide council and staff in the management of coastal areas. And staff, happy to say, were approved to implement the recommendations in this work plan. But also just wanted to flag, it's really not intended to be a detailed action plan of projects and next steps. It's really a policy level resource to support decision making. I know members of the community were really hoping for a detailed action plan, but I consider this the first step in developing those future action plans for the district coastline. So it'll help with more detailed initiatives going forward. Another aspect of work related to natural assets, the Urban Forest Management Plan. This is a really exciting project led by Heather Keith in our planning department. It provides information on tree canopy cover in the district and rates of decline. It looks at important old growth areas, rates of removal, for example. Really interesting to see, for example, you see the graph on the right here, the increase in demand from residents to address either hazardous trees or to address trees for view maintenance really has skyrocketed in the last few years. So it supports decision making with staff. For example, do we need to staff up with our tree portfolio? Quite possibly. As well, I think it looks, there's really a strong desire to protect trees. What we are also seeing is there is a general fear of large trees in the community. Recently saw a tragic event in Horseshoe Bay where a homeowner was killed in their home from a tree falling. And so there are competing views with relation to trees, and those competing views do need to be balanced by staff in various municipalities and organizations. So we have seen since that event an increased community anxiety related to large trees in the community. Another piece of work on the fire department's agenda is the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. It's interesting, consideration of natural capital is just one of a number of factors that needs to be taken into account with decision making. Certain decisions, it's not the most important factor. So here's a great example of council adopted the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. It recommends tree removal to create fire breaks in order to protect the community from devastating fire. And so really, no doubt, climate change is going to bring about some really difficult choices for us in relation to our natural capital assets, and it's going to make these decisions difficult. There's going to be compromise that's required. So this is probably one of the proudest pieces of work completed, and this was really championed by the district finance department, recently passed by council. This is an environmental levy that was again passed by council. It amounts to about $800,000 a year annually, and that's equivalent to about a 1% tax rate increase. And really, this levy is dedicated. It's dedicated funding for climate change response, protecting natural resources, natural assets, and some potential projects could be additional tree canopy work, stormwater infrastructure management projects, wildfire protection, as I mentioned earlier, stream rehabilitation projects. This is pretty exciting work because this puts money behind the issues and allows for practitioners like myself to implement natural asset management work. We could also look at the environmental levy for projects, for example, to lower greenhouse gas emissions in the community, either through district operations, as well as other climate change response projects. So really exciting project. I applaud the finance department in this area, and it also speaks to the need to work closely with your colleagues, work across departments to, as Roy mentioned, mainstream natural asset management in a way that it can be implemented by staff on the ground. And yeah, just thank you for your time, and just noting, the natural asset inventory, it's the first step on placing value on natural assets. It needs to be followed up by continuing the work. Need to integrate it into your original asset management systems, and also into the budgeting approach, and it needs to be accounted for in all of the decisions that are made in a municipality. So thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That was really informative. And I think as you said, it went really well together with Roy's overview. I love how you just dropped in the levy at the end. That's such a huge achievement. And